Hello and welcome to the DraftKings Daily Trot. I'm Big Italy 42. He is Scott Mailwig at Sports 25 to Life, and we're talking about tonight's slate, of course, on DraftKings. And as Tuesdays always are, it's a full slate of action, and so that means we've got aces, we've got cheaper guys. Then, so you got to make your decisions here. Obviously, you're going to want probably at least one of these top pitchers in your cash games. Tell me if as you're looking at the top guys here, who's the one guy that you're probably going to play more than the others?
I think most likely it's going to be Greinke just because I feel the safest with him. I know he struggled last time out against the Phillies, but I mean, he's just been such a good pitcher all year long. I feel pretty confident in his innings. I think secondary would probably be Bumgarner. He's probably like just a slight notch below Greinke for me. Houston's lineup worries me a little more, especially against lefties. They have some pretty good right-handed hitters in that lineup. But Bumgarner, I feel pretty good about, like, racking up strikeouts and pitching pretty deep into the game. Even if he gives up some runs in this game, I think he can have a pretty decent DraftKings line, honestly. I could see easily a game where he goes, like, 7 2/3 innings, gives up 3 or 4 runs, and strikes out 11 guys.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of, like, I don't want to say floor because he could definitely be worse than that, but that's kind of like the average game that I really want to look for. Where Greinke, I feel a little bit better about him keeping it under 2 runs or so and going like 7 innings. I like both of them quite a bit. They're both pretty expensive on DraftKings. I think I'll probably end up with more Greinke just because I feel a little bit safer about him.
Yeah, I'm with you there too. And like you said, there's not quite as much power in that Washington lineup. I mean, they're healthy now, of course, but also you look at the fact that Greinke does a much better job of keeping the ball on the ground than Bumgarner does at 48% to 40%. So, I mean, keeping the ball in the ballpark, obviously a big deal. And, you know, Bumgarner, I guess if he has a weakness, it's at keeping the ball on the ground in the ballpark. So,
yeah.
Other options, you have Matt Harvey against Colorado, which is going to be interesting because he was really good in his last 2 starts, but not quite dominant. I mean, we're looking at his numbers, 7 innings and 7 2/3 his last 2, 1 earned run, no earned runs, 9 Ks and 6 Ks is fine. But I don't feel like, I don't know, maybe it's just me. It feels like he doesn't really possess that ceiling these other 2 guys have had recently. Where, I mean, you wouldn't be surprised if Harvey goes for 30 points, but you're not really expecting him to go to complete game. Plus, you know, he has had some struggles with left-handed batters, and there's one certain one that's way too cheap, Carlos Gonzalez, who's just ridiculously hot right now. So, I mean, it seems like he's done his best to ruin individual starts for some, I mean, probably better pitchers than Harvey even recently, because I believe he hit both those homers off Max Scherzer the other day.
Yep.
I mean, so he's just locked in right now. So you're worried about him a little bit. Maybe Charlie Blackmon still doesn't play. He sat out last night. So I think Harvey's more of a GPP option for me, but I do think he's still fairly safe.
Yeah, I feel pretty good about him as a GPP option. I mean, at some point, Carlos Gonzalez is not going to hit a home run. So, like, if he can get through that, I mean, the Colorado offense isn't very scary right now, especially with Blackmon banged up, like you mentioned. I love him as a GPP play tonight. He's probably my favorite GPP play, actually. Although I do think Bumgarner has slightly more upside just because they'll let him pitch a little bit deeper into the game and stuff like that. I just think Harvey's going to be lower owned.
Yep.
So that's probably why I like him a little bit more in GPPs. I think Bumgarner's probably going to be like 25-30%, I would guess, on DraftKings, where Harvey's probably going to be closer to like 15 or 20. So that makes you feel a little bit better about Harvey and GPPs, just because if he does have that great game, you're passing a lot more people than you are if Bumgarner does the same thing. Outside of that, I mean, there's no one that I'm like really excited about at the top here. I mean, Carlos Martinez is okay. T1 Walker's okay. Carrasco's okay. I mean, all those guys have some upside, but I don't feel great about him.
Yep.
I would say probably my next favorite pitcher, unfortunately, is Yordano Ventura. I'm not really super excited about playing him, but Detroit's offense has like really been struggling over the last week or so. I mean, obviously Cueto's a great pitcher, went complete game shutout on him last night. But Ventura's looked a little bit better over the last 3 starts he's made since getting called back up. He went 7 innings in the first 2, struggled a little bit against Detroit last time out. But at 6,400, with how well the Royals have been playing as a whole, I think he's a pretty interesting cash game play. There's some other cheap guys that I like more as GPP plays, but as far as a cash game guy goes, at like 6,400. I like Ventura a decent amount.
Yeah, I don't mind that. There's a couple guys in the mid 8Ks I think will have some ownership in GPPs.
Yeah.
Joe Ross and Taylor Youngman. I like both guys. I think probably Youngman I prefer a little bit more because he should get some run support. Obviously, the Dodgers strike out more than anybody else against right-handed pitching. Dodgers, obviously not the case with them. But another guy right around that Ventura price I think is interesting, and he did miss his last couple starts with an ankle injury, but he was starting to pitch really well before that. Chris Tillman, you look at what he's done over his past 6 starts, he's only allowed 5 earned runs in over 41 innings pitched. So Seattle's been a pretty hot offense, but I think for those reasons and his cheap price tag, the fact that Seattle has been hitting the ball, I think that Chris Tillman's going to have really low ownership, and I think he's got pretty nice upside at 6,500. Not a guy that I have much confidence in his floor at all, but I think he's got big-time upside at that price. So.
Yeah, I mean, and coming off an injury, both of those things make him a GPP play for me. I like him as a GPP play, though. He's a really strong one. Like I mentioned, Ventura is more of a cash game play for me. I don't think there's a ton of upside there, and I do think there's a decent amount with Tillman and a couple of these other guys that are a little bit cheaper. Even Drew Hutchison against Oakland today, he's a minus 185 favorite for 5,700. He's a great GPP play in my opinion. I mean, the problem with Hutchison is always you either get a guy that looks like he's one of the best pitchers in the major leagues, or you get a guy that looks like he's one of the worst pitchers in the major leagues. And I mean, the 5,700 price tag has that priced right in, if not too much, probably. And especially with the Toronto offense behind him, facing, not a bad pitcher, but not a great one for sure, in Kendall Graveman. So I think there's a lot to like about Hutchison also. And then the other guy I like quite a bit in that price range is Severino for the Yankees. He looked pretty good in he's only made 1 start, right?
Yep.
Is that right? Yeah, I mean, he looked pretty good in that first start. I saw he went 5 innings, 7 strikeouts, so there's some upside there. I'm not expecting him to go really deep into the game. It's pretty obvious he's on a pretty low pitch count right now. There's no reason for them to, extend him too much because they just really don't need him to. So I think you're probably capped at 6 innings, I would guess, unless he's, just absolutely mowing people down. But at 5,500, that's not something you have to worry about too much, especially with how bad Cleveland's lineup has been lately. I mean, he could get through 6 innings with a pretty low pitch count against this team. I mean, there's nobody in that lineup outside of Michael Brantley that scares you right now.
Yeah, and I mean, the good thing about his first start was he didn't walk a single batter and struck out 7 guys in 5 innings, and that's a Boston team that walks a decent amount. They don't strike out much, so, Cleveland, they're a decent team as far as patience at the plate, but they definitely strike out a lot more than Boston does. So I think he's got, like you said, probably capped at about 6 innings at best, but I think he's a good play there, cheap as well. All right, catcher options over here. There's some expensive guys kind of flying under the radar here, some guys that you wouldn't expect to be expensive. One of them that homered last night, Travis d'Arnaud, going to be another tournament play against Chris Rusin, who just has not been very good against lefties or righties this year. Another guy who's been hot, who homered last night, again, also had that, you can call it a triple, I guess. Who was it? Cody Ash fell down, and he just kind of stumbled into third base, but Wellington Castillo, I mean, this guy's been locked in. I think he's got 7 homers over his last 11 games. Absolutely raking at the plate for 3,700. And we know David Buchanan, not a guy that has any, you don't have any sort of confidence in him, especially against an Arizona team that scored 13 runs last night.
Yeah, I mean, Castillo's got a 344 WOBA against righties. Buchanan's allowing a 356 WOBA to righties. I mean, there's a lot to like there for 3,700. It's going to be hard for me to really justify going any other direction in cash games. Maybe John Jaso is probably the only guy I'd really look at. Perez for Atlanta has just been absolutely crushed by lefties this year. 374 WOBA allowed. Jaso is really good against righties. 397 WOBA in his limited plate appearances so far this year. 3,300 for him. Batting leadoff is just, too good of a price for me to ignore. Although Castillo has quite a bit more upside.
Yep.
If you're looking at GPP plays, Buster Posey against a lefty and Casimir is pretty solid. I mean, Posey's been Posey against lefties. Yeah. Casimir's an above-average lefty, but I think as a GPP play at 4,500, you can do a lot worse than him.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And then another guy I'll throw out there, and it's not all Dan Herron bias, but Jonathan Lucroy, $3,300. Should be batting second, I would assume, once again against Dan Herron. I like the Brewers. I don't think I'm the only one that likes the Brewers, but I like Lucroy a lot tonight, though.
Yeah, I don't mind him at all. I mean, there's a decent amount of catcher options considering what we've had lately.
Yeah, and I mean, big slate, so you should have plenty of options. A lot of diversity at all the positions tonight, so that's nice to not have a lot of chalk plays here. First base options, Paul Goldschmidt was off to a fine start last night and then ended up getting rested after, what was it, 2 at-bats, went 1 for 2, had a couple RBIs. That game kind of got out of hand. So, either way, $5,500, he's a great tournament option. You don't expect that he's just going to get pulled early again. But you got to like him. If Edwin Encarnacion's playing at $4,800, you got to like him against Kendall Graveman. He said he had a middle finger irritation, held out the last game. So if he's in the lineup, you certainly got to like him. If not, you assume Justin Smoke will be in there. He might be in there anyway, but $2,600, he's once again a nice value play at home.
Definitely, I don't mind Smoke at all. That's probably the one guy I would look to if I was going cheap at first base for some reason. Albert Pujols I like quite a bit today against Rodon. Rodon's allowing 396 WOBA to righties, which is not good, as you can imagine. And he's a guy that just tries to throw his fastball by people a lot, and that's the kind of guys Pujols kills right now. And so I like Pujols a ton tonight. He's probably my favorite first base play if you're not paying over $5,000. I like Goldschmidt and Abreu quite a bit as GPP plays, but if you're looking to save a little bit of money, Pujols at $4,400 is a really strong play.
Yeah, I got a guy right around that price that I like quite a bit also. Lucas Duda against Chris Rusin. Duda somehow batting almost 100 points higher at home and also has a higher ISO and higher WOBA against lefties. Chris Rusin in lefty-lefty matchups, small sample size, only faced 90 batters, but 406 WOBA allowed. So I think a lot of people obviously won't be on because it's the lefty-lefty matchup, but Duda, as we know, this is just what he does every year. He struggles in the first half and then crushes the ball in the second half.
Yep. Yeah, I like him quite a bit too. I think the last guy I'll mention is a GPP play, Ryan Howard, if he's back in the lineup tonight. He's facing Hellickson, who allows a 368 WOBA to lefties on the year. I like basically all the lefties in Phillies lineup today if you can get them. In Arizona, great park factor. And Hellickson just has not been good against lefties. He hasn't been very good against righties either, but he's been even worse against lefties.
Yeah. That's a good point there. And then one other guy, if you had to go cheap for a GBP, I kind of like Yonder Alonso. I like all the lefties against any lefty you can get against Michael Lorenzen at any time because he has been horrible against lefties. 437 WOBA allowed so far this year. So GPP only there, of course, but at 3,100, I don't think he's a bad option. All right, second base options. You get Brian Dozier at $4,300. I feel like it's a little bit cheap for him. Giovanni Gallardo went through that stretch for a little while where he was good, but he's been getting roughed up recently. So I like him a good amount there. You would love Jose Altuve against a lefty if that lefty wasn't Madison Bumgarner, but that's probably not a route that I'll be taking today. So I think I know where you'll probably be going here if you're paying up a little bit because your boy Ben Zobrist, $3,900.
It's only $3,900. Yeah, I know. I played him last night too, and he had a nice game. I'll probably play him again a decent amount. I do like Altuve though. I mean, he's got a really small sample size against Bumgarner, but he is 5 for 14 against him. Altuve's got a 408 WOBA against lefties. He's only 4,100. I think as a GPP play, he makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
If we're expecting Bumgarner to be like 30-35% owned, I mean, Altuve's ownership percentage between the fact that people are going to have Bumgarner and just avoid him in general is going to be probably single digits at the most. And for 4,100, it's factored into his price a little bit. The wind's blowing out, I believe, right now in San Francisco. It's supposed to be like 15 to 20 miles an hour to center field when the game starts. I don't mind Altuve as a GPP play, but Zobrist is the guy I'm looking at in cash games. And then, as usual, I think Cesar Hernandez is a solid play against Hellickson. As I mentioned, anyone hitting from the left side of the plate today for Philly is going to be a guy that I look at pretty heavily.
Yep, and which brings Chase Utley in there also if you have to save a little bit more at $3K. Should be leading off again. Gotta like him. Scooter Gennett's still just $2,800. Assume that he'll be leading off against a righty. He hasn't been great recently, but I mean, if you need a cheap leadoff hitter, I don't think he's a bad option if you're paying down. All right, third base options. Of course, there's lots of power, as there always is. Get Josh Donaldson against Kendall Graveman, $5,600. It seems like every night he's the top play. It's hard to argue with it, but going to be tough to fit him in there, especially if you're paying up at pitcher. A couple other guys that are interesting. Maikel Franco, you mentioned Hellickson, kind of reverse splits pitcher at times, awful against righties, just like he is against lefties. So 4,500 hit a bomb last night. You got to like him. Todd Frazier just continues to struggle. So at $4,200, I mean, his ownership's going to just keep dropping and dropping. I don't think he's a particularly great play today, but if you just want a low-owned guy that does have upside, I don't think he's a bad option. I think I prefer, though, going down a little bit to Miguel Sano at $4,000.
Yeah, I definitely agree. We'll make the obligatory Jake Lamb mention in Arizona, facing another pretty weak pitcher in Buchanan for Philly, only 3,600. There's one other guy I had cheap at third base here. Let me see who that was. Oh, Derek Dietrich is the other guy that I think is interesting at 2,900. Assuming he's back in the lineup, he's questionable for tonight again. But any of these Miami lefties facing right, I think, are interesting plays today. Wright hasn't been particularly bad against lefties this season, but in his minor league career, he was pretty weak against lefties. So I'm going to be looking at him a decent amount if he's back near the top of the lineup. I know he's been moving around between like second and sixth at times. So we're going to have to keep an eye on that lineup and see if he's in it today. But I like him at 2,800 if he's up there somewhere.
Yeah, I like that call. That's a good call for definitely cheap because you're going to need to save some money at one of these positions. So I think that's a fine call there. And then one more cheap guy who normally known as the lefty killer, but he's been crushing since going to Oakland. Danny Valencia, $3,400. Homers in 2 of his last 3 straight multi-hit games. And Drew Hutchison, actually a reverse splits pitcher this season, 384, well, last season too. 384 will be allowed to righties. So if he's in the lineup, which I imagine he probably will be, as hot as he's been, then I think he's a nice option as well. Shortstop options, one of my favorite tournament options. If I'm going to be contrarian here, you kind of mentioned Bumgarner's ownership going to be pretty high. Carlos Correa has been absolutely destroying left-handed pitching this year. Over 300 ISO, over 400 WOBA. So you don't want to pick on Bumgarner, but like you said with Altuve, if you get a low ownership with a guy who's good in this split, and Correa is very good in this split, you won't see a lot of people paying up for Carlos Correa tonight. So I think he's a really good tournament option.
Yeah, I mean, I think a small Houston stack of the guys that hit lefties well is a pretty interesting GPP play tonight if you're not using Bumgarner.
Yeah.
It's definitely going to be super low owned. It's pretty expensive, but you don't have the option of paying for Bumgarner really if you're going to run that out there. So it's pretty interesting. Elsewhere at shortstop, I think Tulo's probably the top play, hitting leadoff for Toronto as usual. I mean, 4,300 is just still too cheap. In Rogers Center, I mean, there's nothing really not to like there. I mean, Graveman allows a 338 WOBA to righties. Nothing special, but, I mean, more than enough. Hanley Ramirez is back in the lineup today. He's down to 4,200 against a lefty and Nicolino. I think he's an interesting play, but not any. I wouldn't use him outside of GPPs. We mentioned Cesar Hernandez as a value play at second base. He's shortstop eligible also. Cash game wise, I think Johnny Peralta is probably the way you want to go. 3,700 against a lefty and lock. Hitting cleanup for the Cardinals. I think he's probably the most stable play at that price out of all these guys.
Yeah, and like he usually is, you kind of, if you don't feel good about anybody else, that's where you go. Another tournament option is Drupal Cabrera. I hate to say it, as bad as he was earlier in the season, but over his last 11 games, he's 20 for 43 with 6 doubles and 2 homers, batting .465. So, I mean, it's night and day from what it was earlier this season. And you get Williams Perez, who you mentioned earlier is terrible against left-handed batters.
Yep.
378 WOBA allowed. So any of these lefties, and Tampa Bay is another one of those teams that always tends to go under the radar. So with a lack of great options outside of really Tulowitzki and Johnny Peralta, I think that Asdrubal Cabrera is a nice swerve.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. That's a good call. I think he's probably one of the best GPP plays. He's a little more expensive than I'd want him to be for cash games on DraftKings, but as a GPP play, he's great, and I think you can get away with him in cash games. I mean, he has been red hot, like you mentioned. It's a great matchup. There's not a lot that you can argue with. The only problem I have there is it only costs you 700 more to get Tulo. So.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. So, going to be interesting to see tonight. Like we said, not a whole lot of chalk, so going to be fun night. Outfield options: Mike Trout gets a lefty, Rodon, $5,300. Of course, you like him, but I think the more popular player will probably be Jose Bautista against Kendall Graveman at $5,200. You got to like that. Other options: you mentioned Michael Brantley's been hot, but he gets Luis Severino. It's going to be the first time he sees him. Obviously, we saw David Ortiz take him deep. But Brantley's been locked in. I mean, you look at his last 6 games, 5 of them with multi-hits, 2 of them with 3 hits. So I think he's a fine tournament option. Not a guy I'd be playing in cash games, though, because I still think it's a fairly tough matchup because Severino's just got great stuff.
Yeah, definitely. That's probably my big concern there. The Arizona outfielders are fine plays again. Peralta keeps being the guy that's heavily owned. He's probably got slightly better splits today, but I just prefer Pollock in this situation most of the time. He just has a much more well-rounded game, in my opinion. And the fact that he's much lower owned is nice for essentially the same player in terms of value, I think. Projection wise, Cespedes I like quite a bit against Russin, only 4,600. Russin's struggled against righties at 358 Woba allowed. That's another Met that I feel pretty good about. I think the Mets will be an underused stack today. You mentioned Duda already. They got a couple other guys in that lineup that I think you can fit in pretty nicely with some of these better pitching options if you're looking for a cheaper stack.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I think they've been kind of flying under the radar there for a little while, but they've been, if nothing else, they're always patient at the plate. So it seems like there's always base runners. So you just need that one big hit to pay off their salary.
Yeah, the problem is they have some holes in that lineup that make it tough to stack. But I mean, you can do it with like 3-4 guys and feel pretty good about it. As far as cheaper guys go, Grady Sizemore, we've already talked about how well lefties hit Perez. He's probably going to hit second in the order for 2,500 for Tampa Bay tonight. I think that's a rock solid value play. Shane Victorino is probably going to hit leadoff for the Red Sox today against Rodon. I mentioned I like a couple of the other Red Sox hitters. He's only 2,700. If he hits leadoff, it's really hard to argue with him. And then Coco Crisp is flat 2,000. And if he's hitting second in the order against Hutchison, I think he's solid value play too. There's quite a bit of value out there at in the outfield tonight. Even Gregory Polanco is a little cheap still tonight at 3,400. He's facing Carlos Martinez, but Martinez has not been very good against lefties. He loves a 333 WOBA against them, and Polanco's hitting leadoff still. I mean, that price is just not high enough.
Yeah, and Polanco's hitting everybody. I mean, we saw him get leadoff homer off and lefty off Clayton Kershaw. So if you're doing that as a guy that's not a power hitter, you're obviously seeing the ball well. So I think he's one of those guys that maybe people will be scared off, like you said, due to the name, but Martinez is certainly beatable with left-handed bats.
Definitely.
Another tournament option, Chris Davis, Crush Davis, I should say, the baby Crush with a K, $3,600 against Dan Herron, fly ball pitcher at Chicago at Wrigley Field, and he has 2 double dong games in his last 4. Obviously, threw up some duds in between because that's what he does. Not a consistent hitter, but we know that he's got a ton of power when he gets it going. So I think he's a guy that I'll have some exposure to, not a ton probably, but in tournaments. And then as far as other cheap guys, Franklin Gutierrez at $2,700. If he's in the lineup, the guy's been locked in. He's homered each of the last 2 starts, not last 2 games because he doesn't start every day. But if you're not playing Chris Tillman, I think he's a really cheap source of some upside.
Yeah, I agree. I think the last couple guys I have on my list are all A's. Billy Burns, I think, is a fine play at 4,000. Josh Reddick at 4,100. Like I mentioned, Hutchison can look really good or really bad. I think all the A's make pretty good GPP plays. They're going to be really low owned. They're not super expensive. It's just kind of like they fit a lot of teams that I've been making already this morning, and so I'm going to use them a decent amount. I think you mentioned most of the other guys I had on my list, though.
Yep, and I'll throw out one more guy here that I think is an interesting option against the lefty. Casimir usually plays against lefties, but it's hard to say if he'll be in tonight because the outfield's really getting healthy now. But Justin Maxwell, if he's in the lineup at $2,300, the guy's got a ton of pop, and he'll probably bat about 7th, but you got to like a ton of pop against a fine pitcher in Casimir, but for $2,300, you can chase some upside in tournaments.
Definitely.
All right, that's going to wrap things up. Find us on Twitter at DF Cafe. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Check out all of our great content at dailyfantasycafe.com.